Hello everyone, today I will be reviewing Apocalypse Now. So Apocalypse Now came out in 1979 and it was directed by Francis Ford Coppola and it's set during the Vietnam War. Now although this is actually a film which is set during the Vietnam War, the story doesn't actually really focus on the Vietnam War itself. The film is more about war in general and the human experience of war and the effect that war has on people. So into the story we get Martin Sheen play Captain Benjamin Willard, and Benjamin Willard is tasked with going into Vietnam and Cambodia to find Colonel Kurtz. Colonel Kurtz was a special operations officer who went missing in Cambodia and is probably somewhere lost in the jungle. So Benjamin Willard is actually tasked with going in to find him and kill him. So we also get some excellent other actors in this film. We get Robert Duvall and his character delivers that famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." We also get a young Lawrence Fishburne in this film. Interestingly enough, he was actually only 14 years old when filming started, but by the time filming finished, he was actually 17 because the film took a long time to actually film. We also do get a small appearance from Harrison Ford in this film, although it is very brief, and also Dennis Hopper does appear towards the end of the film as a photographer who has gone insane by living in the jungle. One thing that I do want to say about this film is that although it's a war film, it is a very beautiful looking film. So the cinematography is absolutely stunning. It's just every shot is almost a work of art in itself in this film. It really is a very great looking film when you get the scenes of the jungle and the sky and the sea and the helicopters and everything and the forest. It all just looks so magnificent on screen. It really looks like the filmmakers really went all out with trying to capture the way this film is supposed to look. Now this film actually had a really troubled production. Francis Ford Coppola did hours and hours of footage and had to edit it down to only a few, and Martin Sheen actually had a near fatal heart attack on set, and basically there was lots of trouble during the filming of this. It was very troubled production. I think almost the film itself can reflect that, because this does come across as quite a messy film, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but there are quite a few scenes which maybe don't seem to fit in with the rest of the film. Throughout the film, the main story is focusing on Captain Willard trying to find Colonel Kurtz. So most of the story is taking place on this boat with these few other characters along with Benjamin Willard, and they're going down the Vietnam River towards Cambodia, and they come across lots of different obstacles on the way. There's one scene where they come across a French plantation, and they meet some French people and have a bit of an argument at a table for dinner. And that scene, it doesn't necessarily seem to fit with the rest of the film, but I quite like it because it breaks up the film quite nicely and gives us as the audience something different to focus on. This film is loosely based on a novella, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So Heart of Darkness was set in the 19th century in Congo, but this film is instead set in Vietnam. In that way, you can sort of tell that this wasn't made originally as a Vietnam film, but is adapted from a short novel, because the film itself doesn't necessarily deal with the war in Vietnam. It's very much a human-focused story and the effect that war has on man. And we see quite a few of these characters go through different stages where they slowly start to turn insane, particularly with Martin Sheen's character, Captain Benjamin Willard. I'm going to mention Marlon Brando in this film. So Marlon Brando plays Colonel Kurtz. He really doesn't have a massive role in this film, Colonel Kurtz, but the scenes he is in are absolutely brilliant. Marlon Brando really portrays Colonel Kurtz very well, this very mysterious, dark and in the shadows character who is respected by all the people around him and is driven insane by everything that is going on around him. So when this film originally came out, it was roughly 2.5 hours long. Then what happened is in 2001, a Redux version was released, which added lots of extra footage to bring the total running time to about 3 hours 20 minutes. Then in 2019, they released another version, which is Apocalypse Now, the final cut, which is the version I have behind me. And that version, it trimmed about 20 minutes off the Redux version, but still had more than the original version, which means that the runtime is just over 3 hours, I think 181 minutes altogether. So there's obviously a few different versions. I have the Final Cut version. I know there are a few scenes obviously which are missing from it, which are in the Redux version, but because the Final Cut version is supposed to be Francis Ford Coppola's preferred version of it, that was the version that I chose to get. It does seem that I did look into what scenes were in the Redux, which weren't in the Final Cut, and it doesn't really sound like that those scenes necessarily added that much to the story anyway. So I'm not too bothered about missing out. I think 3 hours is a great running time for this film. And as a film, it doesn't really drag on too much. There are only a couple of scenes which hold it back a little bit, but really the film does move quite smoothly, I reckon, especially with Martin Sheen's character. We really get that focus on Benjamin Willard as a character and the other guys in the boat with him. We all learn to see who those characters are as individuals as well. So I've seen a few other Vietnam War films, most notably Platoon and Full Metal Jacket. It's quite difficult to compare Apocalypse Now with these two because Apocalypse Now is very different. It doesn't necessarily focus on the Vietnam War itself, whereas something like Platoon is very much more a proper Vietnam War film, which really focuses on the war itself. Also, Full Metal Jacket is sort of a film which is almost split into the first half is the training, the second is combat. And this film is not necessarily about the Vietnam War, it's more about Captain Benjamin Willard's mission to terminate Colonel Kurtz. So it's very difficult to compare them. However, I do think this is probably the best out of all three, if I was to say as a film, which is the best. I'm saying that in general, talking about which is the best film, because the story, the characters, the setting, the cinematography is all absolutely stunning in this film. This really is a must-see film for everyone, I think. Obviously, being a war film, it is quite violent, but it's not necessarily as violent as some other war films. I wouldn't say the violence is too over the top. It's pretty realistic. We obviously do get people die in the film. It's a war film, so that should go without saying really. But in general, I do think it is a very worthy watch. In terms of what I didn't like about the film so much, yeah, it's difficult to say really. There are one or two scenes which maybe don't necessarily fit in. There's the scene I mentioned earlier on the French plantation. That did, for me, it dragged on a little bit too long. It was interesting to go somewhere different and to see some different characters. But when it comes to the main story of Captain Willard's mission of chasing down Colonel Kurtz, it didn't really seem to fit in. But I do sort of like it in a weird way as well. So I'm happy that they decided to leave it in there in the end. So overall, wrapping up, what do I think of Apocalypse Now? I think it's a fantastic film. I am going to give it a rating of 10 out of 10. And I think it's very deserving of that. So if you like war films or you're interested in seeing one of the greatest films of all time, then please do check out Apocalypse Now. So there we go. So that is Apocalypse Now. So what do you guys think? Have you seen Apocalypse Now? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.